today. Philippa, where are you calling in from?
I am in San Diego.
Awesome. Excited to have you. Thank you so much for being here with us.
And I also see you have Francesca on the screen, so I'm just going to go ahead and introduce her since she is actually joining us, but she's actually also a colleague of mine.
Oh,
And
wow.
we
Hi,
are doing a
Francesca.
whole bunch of stuff for International Women's Day and in my role as a Women Techmaker ambassador. So we'll talk more about that. But I just figured since she's being highlighted on the screen, I'd make the introduction. So,
Oh, I love that.
yes, we are both fellow spatial data scientists.
Welcome. That was just serendipitous. I love that. I love when that happens. Okay, great. All right, so let's get started, everyone. I'm going to give you a quick intro on Philippa and then she's going to tell you a little bit of how we're going to get started. I hope you all are very, very excited because this is geared up to be super, super interactive. So if you are excited to get started, please drop a fire emoji in the chat. For those of you who are new to Mentor Me Collective, we're a community dedicated to empowering individuals in their tech careers through education, mentorship, and community. My name is Renee Williams, and I will be your MC tonight. I am calling in from Jersey. Please excuse the tickle in my throat. I truly apologize. This March, we're celebrating Women's History Month and International Women's Day, which was last Saturday. And the theme that truly resonates is pioneer, progress, and redefine possible. So we're highlighting incredible women tech makers such as Philippa, who are shaking the world with impact. So like I said, we have a fantastic hands-on workshop planned for you. We're going to dive into spatial data analysis using Python and Google Colab. Philippa, that was a mouthful. Can you give us a quick, brief description of that before I go on?
Sure. I mean, it's interesting to me because a few years ago, I didn't know, barely knew what Python was beyond like an animal that sort of slithers, but I had decided that I really wanted to learn coding and I wanted to get in programming. And then I realized I'd actually sort of been doing it in various ways and various forms for a really long time. I mean, of course, it's super lightweight, but starting with HTML because I'd always like stood up websites, and I was like, okay, I'm seeing these things are not so far away, and I realized like the learning curve really is how to explain it, that just once you get started, all of these things then end up being incremental. It's not like huge leaps to move from one coding language to another. Once you start getting the fundamentals, the principles. So I am imagining people here are from every type of experience, and you may have never coded before. You may be an expert programmer. You may be a data scientist, but say, hey, tell me more about spatial because you don't quite maybe work with mapping yet. So I'm making this as interactive and meet you where you are. So my goal is that if you know nothing about this, you're going to leave knowing a whole lot more and hopefully super excited about it with some pathways to go forward. And if you already know a whole lot, I hope this just takes you to the next level and just, again, gets you more excited about where you can go next.
I love that. And you're absolutely right, Philippa. We all come from different backgrounds. I've learned a little coding and then I kind of lost it. So I'm glad you said that. It's kind of like riding a bicycle, I think. So as you said, you're going to make it very hands-on interactive. This workshop is for wherever you come in. I love that you made sure that it's accessible for everyone. So I am going to go ahead and give you all a little bit more about Philippa. She is a geospatial specialist with an expertise in AI, artificial intelligence, and ML, which is machine learning. She holds an MA in urban planning and MS in human security and geospatial intelligence with a GIST, so geospatial intelligence certificate, and is also pursuing a privacy law and cybersecurity certificate at USC School of Law. So, just like Mentor Me Collective aims to empower individuals through education, mentorship, and community, Philippa embodies these values in her work and career. She is also a USGS intern, a Women Techmakers ambassador, Microsoft Student Learn ambassador, and a NICE. Philippa, you're going to have to tell us what NICE stands for later. Cybersecurity career ambassador and leading the Redefine Possible Women Who Inspire and Tech series through 2025. So, with all of that being said, Philippa, we are so excited and thank you for preparing this workshop for us. Um, really quickly, let's break the ice with our listeners. So, if you could describe yourself as a superhero, who would it be and why?
I'm going to chime in because I saw one superhero listed in the chat, and that is Carol. And only some people know about Carol, and that's Carol with a K, Karel. And I am actually going to recommend that as a takeaway for those who want to get more into Python and programming. That is actually one of my favorite classes. It's free. It's from Stanford. We'll talk about it at the end. It's called Code in Place. That's coming up this spring, and they use a little bot called Carol to teach you how to code and really think about coding and breaking down code. I did it last year. I'm going to do it again. Such a great class. It's got like 3,000 teachers, and I think it's like the largest MOOC in the world. And you get 1 hour each week through the duration of a live interactive session. And the rest of it, you can do sort of your own learning paths and assignments. Such a good course. So, anyways, I saw Carol. I was like, I got to comment on that because I'm going to give you as many free resources as I can, but I'm also going to we're going to kick it off with one paid resource I can't live without because writing code is not actually what you think it is. I tend to write into ChatGPT what I'm looking for, and then I cut and paste the code. So you will find that you will move so much faster when you collaborate with ChatGPT.
Okay, Philippa, you are speaking my language. You said free and easy to do. So we are going to excited. Everyone, if you can tell us in the chat, let us know your superhero. But we are going to just with Zach, Philippa, turn it over to you. I am going to exit stage left, and I am going to put your slides up. And we are really looking forward to this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I see SQL in the chat, which is great. So all of this, to me, it's like all incremental learning. Once you sort of get started, you just kind of keep going. So we'll start with a welcome, and then I'll do a technical intro. Then we'll jump into the hands-on lab. And I do want to say about the hands-on lab, I'm going to do a complete walkthrough that if you choose not to sort of open it up and follow along, that's fine. We're going to be working with some satellite imagery, which I don't mean to blow up anybody's memory, and it may be too much. So we'll go through that, and then you can follow along if you're like, yeah, my hard drive cannot download that. That's okay. Then we're going to move into vector data, which is like points, lines, polygons, Excel files, and that should be pretty able to be handled by most systems. And you can kind of choose which data sets you want to download, or you can just download the whole folder. And so I kind of kept that in mind just because I have myself wrestled with my computer with many, many data sets because I actually have an internship with the US Geological Survey this academic year as I'm kind of stepping out of my life as a mid-career grad student. And we just are working with like LiDAR and some other, which is like points clouds, and that's huge data sets that I've just had to learn how to wrestle with the space on my computer. And then we will wrap it up. And I've got some resources for you that we will. So start with the welcome. So it's me. I wore my little pin today. So I'm a Women Techmakers ambassador, and I've been in the program. This will be coming up on my third year. So it's my third International Women's Day. We have a campaign that we run sort of through the months of March and April. Last year, I ended up doing a mentorship for cybersecurity that I ran through the whole year, mentoring 50 women. And this year, it's kind of kicking off a series of events, which I will talk about. Because my other role is I've set myself up as a founder, which I'm not used to using that word, but there I am. I'm a founder and technical specialist at Geospatial Systems, LLC. And Francesca, who I introduced earlier, is my colleague at Geospatial Systems. My interests are in geospatial, AI/ML, and security, which is human security, cybersecurity, climate security. I mean, really, any way you can apply security, that's what I'm interested in. And so here we are for the Redefine Possible. So Mentor Me Collective is obviously doing its own part of this, as Chanel is a fellow Women Techmaker ambassador. And my campaign for International Women's Day is going to be this Impact and Inspiration, AI, Cloud, and Innovation series. And there'll be two tracks to it. One is this Women Who Inspire and Tech series, and another is AI, Cloud, Impact, Adoption, Scalability, and Security. And it's got a mix of both in-person events and online events. So definitely wanted to invite you to come hang out and be part of that community as well, if you are inspired to do so. So that brings us to the end of our welcome and on to our technical intro. Okay, so some of the basics. So Python is one of many programming languages. It is definitely the programming language of choice at Google. You've probably maybe heard of C++, Java, JavaScript, very different. Uh, one of the first things when I very, very first stepped into Python, and I really was like, okay, how do you learn? Where do you start? And I found a 5-hour video on YouTube from Google, which was a video of their training course to their in-house people, so both developers and non-developers. And it came with some sample data sets, and it came with some direction of what to use for an IDE, which is an integrated development environment, the code editor. And that was the first place I got tripped up. I was like, what's a code editor and what IDE? And that was just very hard for me to figure out, and I'm still will admit that I'm finding my ways through different IDEs, and like all have different strengths and different weaknesses. And today we're going to use Colab, which is Google, and the reason we're using that one is it lives inside of G Drive. You don't have to have a Google account to use it. It should be very shareable, and we can run the code right in the notebook. The problem with it is the data sets don't live past your session. So if you are doing it and then you want to do it again, you have to kind of reload and upload your data sets. That's one thing I have learned is really having to write paths. That's one of the sort of the basic foundations of coding is it has to know where do I get the information and then where do I put the information. I can tell you how far I've come because when I first named my computer, I literally named my computer first name space last name. I will never do that again because I break paths and then you have to do all these quotes and other fixes. Otherwise, it just, once it sees a space, it just breaks the code. I mean, the path for that. So that was clearly my amateur mistake. So this is just to tell you how far I've come. And so it did, like, wherever you are welcome. And as long as you sort of just step forward, you will go forward in this path. Just basic definition of data science, that's insights from data. And spatial data is where it has a geographic component, so we can put it on a map. And so today, these are all the things that we're going to be covering. So now we can move on to our hands-on lab. Just going to ask, are there any questions in the chat? And the link that has been dropped into the chat is where you're going to get the notebook and where you're going to get the folders. And I'm going to do a screen share in a second, so I'll walk you through everything. But go ahead and get that link, and that's where we're going to move into our hands-on lab portion of what we're doing. And is there any, okay, yeah, and then we just basically wrap it up. While I'm here, I'm just I'll lead up front because I know some of you may not be able to stay till the end. So let me just go ahead and just put this sort of bottom line up front, which is here are the resources that I really want to direct you to so you can continue your learning. And one is Code in Place. Just look up Code in Place. Basically, the application is your first week of homework. So if you're a good fit for it, you're going to go through that homework. It might challenge you. It's not super easy, but it's doable, very doable. So if you set aside a bit of time for that application, and then I think anyways, we're in March, so you've got time. And then once you get that done, they ask you to tell a bit about yourself. And then about a week before, they'll sort of give you an acceptance. I think as long as you just present yourself as a willing, able, and someone who's going to have the time to commit to the program. I think it's about 7 hours a week. They will let you in, and you can jump right in. Next one is we're going to talk about Esri and maps. I don't ever mean to make anybody cry when I'm like, you can learn Esri on your own. I do a lot of blogging now. I'm wanting to do a lot more on YouTube, so you can always reach out to me and sort of ask questions because this is not super easy, but they do. Sometimes you can just watch the videos and get your mind around it, and then you can, again, similarly kind of get into the labs. But again, this is free, and they give you access to the software for the duration of these MOOCs, which are massive online open courses, and they have them many throughout the year, so I just simply picked up the one that's coming next. And then lastly, this is me. Maps Data Design is one of my channels. I have a couple of different niches, and Maps Data and Design is one of them. So you can find us on Substack and YouTube and continue the conversation. I'm very inspired to teach and engage and mentor, and so that brings us to that. So now we're going to jump into our lab. me go ahead and do a screen share. And you're gonna, okay, so we're gonna go entire screen so I can flip between. So this is my notebook, which will need to be reconnected. And this is your notebook. So it will say, please open and copy. So you can go right here to the file and make a new notebook in Drive. If you wish to make it in Drive, you can save. Oh, actually, that might create a brand new one. Save a copy in Drive, save, or you can download it, and then you can re-upload it however you wish to do it. I know not everybody has G Drive, so if you have technical issues with any of this, just drop it in the chat, and we'll troubleshoot as we go. So this is my notebook. I'll run through this with you. And then this is the secret sauce that I use for everything, which is ChatGPT. Now there's a free version and there's a paid version. The difference between free and paid is the free version, you can ask questions, you can tell it what you want, it can still help you code. You can definitely, if you're looking for free, you can take this pretty much as far as you can go. But once you find yourself doing a lot, you may find that you want to upload a PDF or upload a screenshot. Typically, it's the screenshots that I will share saying, hey, this is working, this is not working, especially with maps, and then it can help me troubleshoot and to write the next section of code. So that is a huge help when you are going through this process. But I'm going to say that you want this in combination with a community, because there are problems that ChatGPT cannot solve, and sometimes you just need to reach out to someone and say, help, how do I do this? Because when I was first learning how to do JavaScript, I didn't know that you had to download Node.js in order for it to work. So even though all my code was clean and perfect and everything was running, I couldn't get it to run. And I had all my different pages that kind of interconnect, and I was ready to launch a web app and I just couldn't get it to run. And I was like, well, why not? And then being part of this Microsoft program, they had a technical onboarding and they had us watch videos, which were about JavaScript. And it basically, by video number 3, it was like, download Node.js. It's like, oh, I get it now. And then I did that, and then everything worked beautifully. So that is just one of those things that, having that community that you can go to and that you can reach out to, you will fall down tech holes. It will sometimes feel really difficult, and never make it about yourself. Never make it about like, I'm not good enough. Always make it about, who do I need to ask? Who do I know that I can just reach out to and ask for some help? That's always the way forward. Okay, so we ready? We've got, now let me get you into, okay, so within that link, so let me show you my drive. So we've got the notebook, which is the one that ends in that IPNYB. That's just kind of a Python extension. And then you've got 3 folders here. You don't necessarily need the images. Those are just the images that I've included within my notebook. They should be transfer over into your notebook. Then we've got the raster data. And I just want to explain, like, these are satellite images, and they come from Landsat, which is the US satellite. Sentinel is the European one. And these are the files, and the first ones don't look so big, but as you get further and further and further on here, all these megabytes start to add up. Like, you've got 89 and 86. And so I'm going to let you make the call if you feel like your computer can handle it. If it cannot, just follow along, and I'm not going to ask you to sort of upload this and make this your own data, because it will really either slow down or crash your computer, and I don't want that. Again, here's some other ones, and these are 16. Yeah, they get pretty large. A lot of the ones I'm working with and some of my other work are gigabytes. And so in order to do any process, I need to free up 50 gigabytes on my computer. So these are the raster files, and raster, we'll talk about in a second, is like data that lays over like a sheet, like a satellite imagery, like a photo, drone imagery, anything like that. And then vector images are points, lines, and polygons. So these are the data sets that we have for the points, lines, and polygons. And as you can see, they're a lot lighter in storage. Probably the building footprints is pretty big at 8. And some of the rest of it should be pretty manageable. But if you think you're going to have any concerns, you can maybe just download a file at a time rather than the whole folder. So that's our data. And then you have your notebook. So copy that, make it your own, and then you'll open it. And the next thing we're going to do is get the data into the notebook. So you have options here, and we'll kind of have to go through this together. So one option is that you've downloaded it, and now you can upload it off of your desktop using this little file upload. Or the second one is if you use G Drive, you can uh, bring it in through G Drive. It'll just ask to connect your G Drive, and it's this piece of code right here that is bringing this blue box towards. You run that piece of code, and then it will say that you're mounted, and then it will actually lead you to go find the data, find that folder, and you can bring that folder in. So I'm going to take a break here so that I can come back to, so I'm going to stop sharing for a second so that I can come back to the chat and I can see if there's questions. Okay, I see a question for me. Tips for anybody starting out with data analytics with no technical background. I did not have a technical, well, I'm going to say I didn't have a formal technical background when I started, but I always had an interest in tech. And when I look back on my life, I've always been a very early adopter to technology. And when I was on teams and we just like stand up a website, so it was always like tech adjacent, but nobody would ever have said I'm in the tech industry the way they would now. And so if you are not technical, you just begin with where you're at. I'll say, for example, like I do a lot with cybersecurity. The name of my company is Geocyber Systems, so it's geospatial and cyber. But I find myself like I'm in law school for cybersecurity, so I'm following paths that are GRC. So as much as I like coding and I'll do hackathons and I'll continue building my technical skills, I do it sort of ever incrementally. So you don't have to be too overwhelmed, but you do have to begin. And we're going to get into a lot of that today. So I think you're actually going to see data science in action as we go through this notebook. And you're just going to see like, I uploaded into Jupyter. Yep, that should be fine. As long as you can connect the data, and so you can work the data sets. And again, whatever works for your computer, you're good. Yeah, you can use this. This notebook can be used in any IDE that is workable for you. I was just using Colab, just I figure it would both work for the most people. But yeah, you've got skills to take it somewhere else, absolutely go for it. Both the notebook and the data is completely portable. Okay. Any other questions that should be highlighted for us to address as we? All right. Okay, I see Mentor Mage Collective also asked any other questions. Okay, well, I don't see any, so I will come back to ask them if they're there. So going back to sharing the screen, I think what might be best is to actually start to just walk you through my notebook, and then we'll kind of get into the hands-on part, just so you can see where I took this from sort of top to bottom. And I was thinking about like what case study do I want to use? What subject area did we want to use? And I also realized that I have limited time. And so it occurred to me, I've been playing with some hackathons lately. And that's actually another great data analytics question is like Kaggle, Kaggle is a great resource. Statistica is another one. Like there's some really good kind of hubs that if you're interested in data that you just kind of get involved. They have a lot of hackathons and you can just continue improving your skills there. There's no necessarily like losing when you do a hackathon in terms of like if you grow your skills and you enjoyed participating in it. This one I actually had found last year and I was way over my head from where I was a year ago in what the challenge was, but they had the best data. They have this satellite imagery of Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. And we ended up, I was in a remote sensing class for university, and we ended up using that data and the idea of the project for our final project. We just ended up taking 3 months longer than the challenge deadline since it was so new to us. But we did complete it. We just went a lot slower. So this year, this challenge has kind of come back into my line of vision, and it's something that I'm playing with right now. And I was like, you know what? I'm just we're gonna live here for a minute because just something fun to look at. And there's just so much data that you could add to make this your own or to really look at anything in New York. We're just happening to look at urban heat islands, which is where there's a concentration of heat, which can negatively impact human health. A lot of deaths from summer heat. So it's an issue that they decided was worthy of exploration. And so they put together this machine learning challenge. And I was working on it. I was kind of doing my own sort of data exploration, and I was like, you know what, there's other data sets I kind of want to explore. So this was a great opportunity for me to spend that time putting that together. So this is the challenge. It opened in January and it will close next week. So it's something I'm kind of playing with. And with anytime you're working with any like data analysis or anything you're doing in data science or geospatial, typically there's a research question. There's science research questions, and then you could call them like there's policy or intelligence research questions, and they're going to vary on that scale of how much detail they need, how well sourced your data is, how well cited it is. Because again, I've got a USGS science internship, and I'm really learning the specificity and accuracy that's needed in science. Whereas I also do quite a bit in the intelligence community, and that's much more general and much more geared to geopolitics. And I have an urban planning master's, and you could sort of say that that's more geared towards policy. So, what can we say that would help in thinking about a city's design? So, some of our data came from Landsat, and other data came from New York City's open data portal. And most cities have a data hub. So, there's an infinite amount of data that you can get, mostly for free. And there are some limitations that require a school address or nonprofit or other things. But if you're really looking for data, there's a lot out there. So we start with, again, this is kind of a normal sort of process as you'll sort of say, what's the study area? So for us here, the study area is Manhattan. And there's, New York City. And then you can see in the center of that is Manhattan. I know that there's some of our hosts today based in and around New York City. I actually grew up probably just a few miles left of that western boundary box in New Jersey. And here we are. Okay, our data sets. So this is like if I write a paper, it's sort of the same process. Like what's the study area? What's the research question? What's the study area? What are the data sets? So raster data is what lays over like a sheet. So it's an image, a picture, it's pixelated data. So decide this is a picture of Yankee Stadium in New York. And so it's an example of like what is raster data. And of course, all of this is geo-referenced, so we know exactly where on Earth this sits relative to any other images or features. A feature is a layer that you would put on top of this. So for example, you could add like the railroad lines and the streets and the trees, like anything that could be a point, line, or polygon is considered a vector. Actually, I would say layers, you can have multiple layers. You can have raster layers, you can have vector layers, because all of these things can sit on top of each other, and you can move their hierarchy around, and just all sorts of things that you can learn from the data. And then where do I get the satellite imagery? So the satellite imagery that I got for this is from the USGS, and that is the US Geological Survey. And you go in and you tell them kind of what you're looking for, the dates. A big part of working with satellite imagery, that's the big challenge, is clouds. And I really knew I was a spatial data scientist working in remote sensing when I was on an airplane seeing clouds and they no longer look like joyful, fluffy things. I was mad at them. Like, I don't like clouds. They make my work very difficult. So that is, so I was actually felt very fortunate that the image that I found was cloud-free over New York and the Bronx. So we talked about the data and loading the data. Again, you're going to load it here either by uploading or you're going to connect it there. And then, so download, upload. And now we've with our analysis. And I'll walk through with you guys what the code is doing. And here, like I said, that Landsat is that satellite imagery. And now there's a thing called indices where when they take the satellite imagery, it comes in bands, different multispectral, hyperspectral bands. And when you combine the bands and do all sorts of what they call raster math, you get different indices. And so the tiles are really large when you download them from USGS. So this is actually an example of the various indices with these very large tiles, so that New York City is actually in the top right-hand corner of these. So that's So a lot of times when you go through a process, it's kind of like what's needed. This is exploring the data. You get kind of what's needed next. And so what I realized, I was like, I need to clip the data to get to my study area. So this is all kind of similar. And what we're looking for is some of this really highlights kind of where that heat is coming from. And then looking back to the natural color, sort of these are some of the clipped images there. And then I wanted to sort of do a little bit more with indices. So NVDVI is natural vegetation index. There's a burn ratio. Even though this is not burned, it still kind of gives you a different view that is different. So there's I think there's another slider bar in here. That, yeah. So you can just sort of see that each version of it kind of gives us a little bit more data. Obviously, there's no snow, but you're sort of seeing what it looks like with kind of a more of a blue hue. Enhanced vegetation. You can sort of see the island of Manhattan there, and temperature. So yeah, there's different ways to look at that raster data. And then this one was a surface temperature. So as we go through it, you can kind of calculate different things. Then we get into the vector data, which is those points, lines, and polygons, and that's where I have different data sets. Like we have the building footprint, we have, and we have temperature over time, and so this is sort of a scatter plot. So now you can sort of do all sorts of different analysis that gives you different results. You can kind of see what's in your data, and you can match your data. You can again look at it in different ways. This is we were looking at trees, and they measure trees by what that tree breast height is, and so and then you can get a heat map of it. And so these are all kind of different ways of looking at the data. And then here we have like a heat map, so you can sort of see, okay, how does that perhaps relative to the trees that are in New York City, does that the great more or less trees kind of make a difference in that? And so we were looking at tree coverage and sort of like just playing around with like different ways to visualize the data and to start to understand, are there correlations, or are there so there's causation, which is it's a direct response, like that this caused that, causation, or the correlation, which is like, those things might have something in common. Can't ever say it's a direct cause, but we could say there might be something there. I don't know how many of you are familiar with redlining, and that's a kind of a historical practice, and I think this is one of the reasons why so much of what we're doing today to make sure that we're creating a much more of a level playing field, because of the historical damage that has come from redlining maps. But I felt that data also could be really important here, because we could see, like, does that historical way of mapping come through today and in a heat index? And in the analysis that I did, the answer was yes, it did. In terms of but we can visualize that. We can try it in a box plot. We can try it in the more box plots, and we're just looking at tree size, we're looking at tree location, tree density, and we're also looking at that heat index relative to those different redlining categories. And we come to a conclusion here somewhere very soon. I run this through you. Okay, and then I left the original part of the notebook in here because I'd run it successfully, which is the machine learning part. So you can sort of take all of this data and then you can move it to a machine learning algorithm where you're actually training the model to make predictive analysis of, given certain circumstances, what that could look like and where. And so here in these images, these were the ones that they provided to us. And you can see those green spots, those are the clouds. So oftentimes that's one of the challenges you're going to get when you're working with raster data, and that brings us to the end. So I'll do another round of questions, then I'm going to have you run the notebook yourself, and we'll kind of go through the code and kind of explain where it comes from and what it's doing. And then there's plenty of options to customize this as well for yourselves.
There aren't any questions currently, Philippa, but I do want to ask you about Carol, which is why I said that. Thinking about, and before I get to Carol, just a general question about geospatial data. What are some other real world problems that people could start thinking about that they may see in their day to day to connect it to, oh, okay, this is a geospatial question that I
Mhm.
could use data for?
Absolutely. And honestly, the applications are extensive, so extensive. So it's really more like pick a field.
Mm,
You can do anything. So there's time series, so you can look at things over time. Historically, how have they changed? How have so you can just pick one location and say, how has this changed over time? And you can do that, especially in disaster management. It's huge. I
mm,
mean, you can look at the Los Angeles fires recently. There's some
oh,
very clear before and after. I do a lot of wildland fire support, and so again, we're looking at not only looking at the before and after of a fire, but looking at forest fire recovery over decades. But if you work in retail, you can look at sort of which stores are performing the best. You can look at distance, like you can see uh, how you can do routing, which is the best route to take if you have to deliver something or pick something up or have something come in. You can, yeah, you can look at things from like if you have a bunch of stores, you can do a heat map to say which are the most successful stores. But how do you define success? Is it based on the amount of revenue over time, or is it based on revenue per or like the dollar value per product sold? Like that's where data science kind of gets fun, is you can figure out, well, what's the measurement, what's the metric that
mm.
defines success.
Got it. Okay, that's great. I loved your redlining one. And definitely with the recent education stuff going on, I think that could be a good one too. We have another question here, and it's about the images that were in your data set. So are they altered by code? Were you playing around with pixels, or are they raw heat maps?
So that was based on the satellite imagery that was provide. Okay, so there's two things. So this, you get the satellite imagery, which I'll call natural color. And then you also have the option to order indices. And the indices are kind of a mathematical calculation of like, how do you create an NDVI, which is normalized vegetation index, which is basically reflectance that are being picked up by the satellite for vegetation health. So you can see if there's a lot of green, that vegetation is doing great. But if there's a lot of um, like going towards red, that there's just no vegetation there. There's no vegetation health. It's either there's no plant there or that plant is not doing well. So you can it's hugely beneficial in agriculture, I would say, when we're looking for applications, especially kind of precision agriculture. But anyways, that so you can order it that they make it for you, and then you can go and download it. And you can actually also download it. When you download it, you can download it clipped. So you get your coordinates and you input them into the system, and then you, instead of getting these massive files, which can be very challenging to work with, they'll give you a clip version of it. You can also make, using the code, make your own version of that same thing. You just give it the mathematical formula. Doesn't matter that you don't know the mathematical formula, because ChatGPT does. You don't even need the paid version for that one. You just say, I need the code for this, and it will make it for you.
Nice.
So this is all, so everything that you saw there and all the transformations you saw there, uh, I was going to say, well, the initial indices we saw, those were the ones I ordered from, it's called ESPA, which is part of the USGS. But then the other ones, other things were, but even I was used code to visualize them. So I used the code to go get the file, to show us the file, and then I used the code to trim the file. So all of those visualizations you saw were all created in the code that we wrote.
Nice. Thank you. And another question. So you showed us Google Colab.
Mm-hmm.
What are some other tools or platforms that beginners could use that they just need in their toolkit to learn to begin using geospatial data? I know you mentioned earlier, someone else did in the chat, Jupyter Notebook, but could you give us just like a quick little toolkit that people could use to get started?
Absolutely. There are, well, there's so, I think that one of the challenging things is there's so many. The really
Mm,
robust one, which I've literally taken like 2 master's degrees to get my arms around, is this Esri ArcGIS Pro. And that is just the main, like, if you want to be a geospatial analyst, then that's one of the tools. But there's also Google Earth Engine, and it does similar things. Not, it's just, it's different. But it was interesting to me. I did a capstone project where the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency was our mentor, and that's coming out of the intelligence industry. They wanted us to use Google Earth Engine. Working with USGS, they want us to use ArcGIS Pro or basically get all our data directly from USGS Earth Explorer. They don't trust or not, it's not as scientific as they want it to be.
Mhm.
So there's always a scale of, when you're looking at stuff again, what is your research question? Is it very scientific? Is it more for policy, or is it more for intelligence? And so once you understand what you're trying to do, that will kind of lead you to the tool. Also, one of the things I'm very gray about is because I've been in grad school for a minute, I get so many things with my .edu, and then I'm
Mhm.
not as clear if you don't have that and you just register as a person, what your limitations are. So that there are a lot of things like that are free, but then there's other ones that's like free for research or academic, and then other ones that do come with a price. So a
Okay.
lot of that is but Google Earth Engine, ArcGIS Pro, and all the stuff that you can do with a notebook. I mean, a notebook can be really powerful, but I would say a lot of us, including myself, don't actually write the code. I don't sit there and sort of say, okay, I know how to create this data frame. I kind of know the gist of what I need to do, but I just bring it all into AI and let AI help me write it.
Actually, that was a great transition to a question that we have, which is, do you have any concerns about using ChatGPT for code? And do you have any advice for entry-level data scientists and programmers? Should they lean into that or pace themselves and learn coding?
Well, I think the way you're going to learn coding is to do projects. And so do the project, do the notebook. You need to understand or do, like I have one that I did for Cesium. That was the one I was learning how to do a JavaScript, but I didn't know how to do JavaScript. And I didn't get in the instructions that it will not work if you do not download Node.js. I mean, a lot of code works that way. For example, when I first saw the bulk downloader, because again, when you go and request these files, there's hundreds and hundreds of files that they're delivering to you. And a lot of them come zipped, and you have to unzip them. And so you use different things like LAS tools, because a lot of especially we're not talking today about LiDAR data in the sample notebook, but with LiDAR, it comes as a tar.gz file, which is an LAZ file, which then needs to be unzipped to an LAS file. And most of your normal unzippers aren't going to do that. You need a very specialized tool called LAS tools. And a lot of that stuff, like ChatGPT, is not going to know. That's where I'm saying your community is so important. The people you can reach out to, the people you can have discussions with, because then you could say, how do I do this? What tools am I using? Give me some direction. Then you can sit down with ChatGPT and kind of work it out. Because a lot of times I still have to ask, like, hey, am I unzipping this in a Colab notebook? Am I unzipping this in Anaconda? Uh, a command line? Am I doing it in my regular CMD command line? There's a lot of things you end up using your command line for as you unzip files, and so a lot of times, but if I didn't, like I said, it doesn't know kind of where to go. Sometimes it doesn't know what the purpose of your project is, and so a combination of your own intention and your own experience that you've built on. And so that's why I say hackathons are really great, or just projects that I'm going to build something because I'm interested, or I want to do a study on something. And so you're saying, like, what is the applications? And then GitHub repositories are a wealth of information. Like, people have already built it and said, here's our code, go make it your own, go play with it, go try on this project. So yeah, replicate projects is key. So there's an infinite number of projects out there. I think the key is with all of this is connect to what you're most passionate about and what you're most interested in, and let that interest lead you. So, can this be used to assist in solving global warming issues? Absolutely. And but I mean, there's different aspects of global warming. There's the global side of it. There's local impacts. You're seeing a lot more disasters happen that are a lot more frequent, a lot more intense. So you can also, study weather. You can also say, okay, climate's an issue, but so is pollution, and just that we pollute our rivers and we pollute the air. And so there's all sorts of environmental factors. Environment connects to health. There's all sorts of health factors that you can map. There's diversity issues, there's equity issues that we as a society need to address. I mean, if just this is going to sound like the dumbest thing to say as a white person, but I like kind of always grew up like, I'm not racist. I don't know what that means. Like, I did not know what that meant until I went to get an urban planning degree. And I was like, oh my God, racism is like super real. And we are like have systemic racism in our society. And there's a really powerful book called The Color of Law. And it talks about how urban planning practices and rules and policies and law codified racism and why we have an unequal society and that that persists to this day and how we were actually seeming like to me, I'm not trying to be political here, but making a lot of progress with some of the DEI initiatives. I can't speak to, I can only speak from my perspective. I've been respectful for all voices to sort of share their lived experience and their points of view of how we solve these things. But to me, it's like we have to understand, like we do live in this inequality, and mapping is the easiest way to demonstrate this, and to actually show it on a map. You can see it, and then we can come together and say, how do we improve things? How do we make things better? This little sort of kernel, and I'm going to go on a tangent here, but uh, of like, what is abuse? And one of the things about, or it's not sort of what is abuse, but how do you recover from abuse? And one of the things is both parties need to agree to what happened. If one party starts to gaslight the other one about what happened, you're never going to find healing. And then if you can get to a place where you can say what happened, you can get to the next place potentially, which is what was the impact of what happened, and to give that person the space, or that community or that culture, the space to acknowledge what was the impact of what happened. And only then can you come together and go, okay, where to next? How do we move forward? But as
Yes, I totally agree. Sorry, I did not mean to cut you off, but I had to say that. Yes.
And so that to me is the power of mapping. That is the power of data.
I think that is the most amazing explanation of it, specifically because, like you said, it's very hard to, from my experience having been a researcher, to have data be used and kind of weaponized, kind of like you said, as abuse, to use data as a reason to prove or disprove something. And then if you don't have the knowledge or the education of how to interpret the data can be manipulated, right? We can see hallucinations like we see in Chat GPT. So having that awareness and understanding, and like you said, the ownership of it, so that the healing can happen and then the change can happen. We do have another question, but I also want to be cognizant of time. It's 6:56. Do you want to go ahead and answer this question and run people through the notebook, or do you want to take the question?
How can spatial data analysis enhance my research on food deserts and college communities? I am curious about adding geographical data to my previous survey work. I have a BS in nutrition science. That's a great question. And a lot of that data exists. So I don't know the limitations of an ArcGIS. Like when you do the MOOCs, I know they give you access to some of the ArcGIS Pro tools. And when you're in ArcGIS Pro, you have access to the whole data library. So if anybody's done research on that, they have like sort of more amateur sets, meaning like kind of anybody contributes to the data sets, and they have really professional, very, very clean ones that typically live in Living Atlas, but they're all accessible to you. So a key is just going to be finding the research and finding the data. That's going to be, but in terms of mapping it and starting to see, you can do all sorts of spatial analysis where you do buffer zones, so you can see like what is within in a certain area. And there's certainly like so many ways to sort of visualize that data. When I was at the Esri conference last year, one of the more powerful things someone said to me was, we as map makers make the world. What we see and we say is so powerful, and other people believe it.
Yeah.
And I was chit chatting with one of the trolley station workers when I was getting my trolley home to back to where I was staying. And I would just comment on that. And he's like, no, it's true. He's like, the number of people who thinks our train tracks are a road because Apple Maps says so. So we really, but one of the things I want you to think about at this stage, especially if you're just getting started, I'd done another workshop, and I do want to get our hands-on piece going, but I'd done another workshop where it was for urban planners about a year ago. And what we were talking about was being a map reader and then being a map leader. And then eventually, if you want, you can become a map maker. Becoming a map maker is really hard. Like you'll have a new respect for the people who actually make the maps. But start with knowing how to read the graph. It's knowing what the different types of graphs are, knowing where the data came from, knowing how authentic that data was, who made this map, what kind of bias do they bring. Every map has bias because
Mm-hmm.
there's no such thing as, I mean, we're not making maps on a globe. So you always have every projection you choose is a choice because it's going to distort something. What does it distort? Every time you're communicating data, it's a choice. So you want to basically be able to understand what choices was that cartographer making, or that data scientist making. So start by being a data science reader, read the data, and really sort of understand like where did that come from, what data set did they use, how legit was that data, how complete was that data set. So start by map reading, then map leading is I need a map. Who can I go to get one? Or I need some data science. Who can I go to get one? Yeah, ArcGIS is amazing. And again, do the MOOCs and you get access, free access during the duration of the MOOC. Even if you decide not to finish the MOOC and you just want to play on your own with ArcGIS, it you get access. So, and then I do know that they for $100 they have a 1 year personal license, but I would not get that unless you have a team of people around you from your communities that can help you answer those questions. Because if you're anything like me, you will cry as you learn this, but you will get through the other side. And I was able to do that because I always had some people to call and say, hey, where to next? How do I solve this? I've seen a video from an educator speaking on inaccuracies from world maps, making US seem bigger than it is. Distortions like that affects people and viewpoints. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, they have all these videos where they'll take a country and they'll like move it based on like real size. And they're like, it was like, yeah, I had no idea. Because we are trained in a certain way to believe certain things about the world. And so the way we look at the world, like the northern hemisphere is big and the southern hemisphere is small. Like all these little distortions all impact our perceptions of things.
Yeah. And I do think also adding for the food deserts, thinking about indigenous communities, because indigenous communities and pricing of food and access is also similar to food deserts. So not to throw a monkey wrench in anything, but I would definitely also say look into that. So we're at 7. Philippa, I don't know if you have enough time, but do you want to go through the
We've got
notebook?
30 minutes, right?
Yes, a little
Okay.
bit. Yeah.
This is a question for the audience because I am happy to go through it. As anybody's loaded up the data, anybody's kind of ready to go. I'm curious how like your notebook runs and if you're able to um, get some of the pieces that I got. You don't have to run through the whole thing, but you can sort of let's see.
Awesome.
Jump in.
Yeah.
All right, I got a yes, yes, yes. All right, Levy. Let's go. Okay, I'm going to go back to my screen share and okay. So this is your notebook, and if it's already got some of the things like visualized, so I think it's like more if you rerun the code, if it will happen. So obviously we've got markup, which is so here when you want to add a new line, for anybody who's not familiar with Colab, you can add a line of text or you can add a line of code, and then you can put in sort of whatever you want in the text. You can add images, just so you're clear about how I add those images. This is what that code looks like on the back end. So it will have my name, and then it's going to my G drive and pulling that image. And so if you wanted to swap an image out, that's how you would do that. And so I have my images, and so we come back down here. So this was just kind of the intro, getting those files in. So if you're mounting it to your G drive, you would use this piece of code right here. If you're not, then you would, I think this is where I'm actually going to encourage you might need to customize some of that to your own working environment, because I was working with data that was inside uh, my G drive or inside Colab. So if you're somewhere else, but I have this import OS, import glob. And just so we're clear, just going back to sort of what import means, sometimes before you are allowed, like some things, it knows what a library is and it knows how to get that, knows what to do with it. Other times it has no idea and you have to do an install And so you have to install that library and then you can import it. So a lot of times anyway, so this would be my next question is if you can um, run this line of code and see what happens for you there. So because I have no data uploaded here, that what had just listed data now is telling me that this is empty. But if you have listed data, it should be able to show you what those files are. So I'm going to just go a little bit and then I'll come back and see if there's any questions on this. But if you, okay, so here is another one where it's like pip install is how you install a library. And so then when you run this, it will go ahead and pull in that library. And then it will tell you that it's okay, it's good. So now you can run the next line of code. You run it with this little play button right here. And then that said it, because it's check mark, it's like, that's good. There was no output needed there. And then again, I don't have data so loaded into this notebook. So if I run this, it's not going to work. So if you are decided not to use the raster data, then you would not use this. You would go down to the part that past the raster data and into where we start with the vector data. And then you can start here. So similarly, now we're here in the vector data. So we did our pip install. Here we're using GeoPandas, PyOGrio, and Fiona. Now, this is the point of practice and just being, again, part of community is like, you may never have heard of these things before, but like once you sort of lean into it and you just start working with this a little bit more, like these things will start to become more and more familiar for you. But then there's always new things to learn. So I know about GeoPandas. That's like part of working with geospatial data. I know about Fiona, but PyOGrio was entirely new to me and was introduced to me by ChatGPT for this assignment. So again, I would do that pip install. And I have worked with I've worked with Azure, I've worked with Google Cloud platform. And I know with Azure, like I was working with their machine learning studio, I struggled and struggled and struggled because there's a thing like all of these at the end are like what version number, and they're constantly updating the version numbers. But then there's these dependencies that don't work with each other. And so all of that was breaking and it was causing me great frustration. So sometimes it works really easily and it's like you're good to go. And other times it's painful. So, but that's, again, I don't let the pain scare you away. It is worth it. And I'm just like so happy you guys are all here. So import, again, now I've already pip installed them. And then import, let's see, we imported. Okay, so now again, I don't have that data set here. You want to make sure, and you might have to check and clean this code to where this is, because I think in my first run, all this data was living in my content folder. And if you've uploaded it, it might be just living in the base folder without that. It might not be inside a folder. So you might need to just edit that code to make sure it's aligned with your path. Knowing paths is like so fundamental to coding, because that's what you're telling the computer is like, where do I pull this file? And oftentimes, if I'm creating a new file, where do you want me to save it? That's a big part of just like making sure you have clean paths. And if for some reason a file name that you had has that dreaded space in it, just pieces of coding that you'll learn as you go is you can add an R, and then that will read that space as one file name, and you've got those quotes there, so it's kind of in between. Or sometimes another way is to double quote it, and well, if it was in a file path, so you just use those 2 slashes, and so it will know that that is a file that, again, it won't break it. So there's different ways related to that that you will learn. Okay, I'm gonna come back and see how you guys are doing and answer any more questions. Okay, is GeoPandas just a Google Colab? No. GeoPandas is like foundational to geospatial analysis. If you're doing any kind of coding with any kind of geospatial data, your GeoPandas is like the foundational one. Just like pandas is usually used for data frames when you're doing spatial analysis. So actually, someone was saying like, how do I learn data science? It's like learn the libraries, because each one does different things. So like matplotlib does a certain type of statistics, and Pandas does sort of data frames. So you get better and better with the work that you're doing when you get those libraries that do very specific things. So Restereo is one other one that is very common for satellite imagery. GeoPandas, if you're working with any kind of the vector data, shape files are kind of a very common type of way to save map files. But oftentimes, yes, got it. I missed the cell importing it. Okay, cool, cool, cool.
So Philippa, question for you. So as you're running that code and you're doing it, can you tell us what's going through your mind? What's your thought process as you're looking at the data? Are you looking for any discrepancies? How are you ensuring that the data is maintained? And or if you're cleaning it up, how do you make sure you're cleaning it up in a way, like you said earlier, that doesn't.
Well, let's start with one of the biggest things you're going to get when you run code sometimes. It's just an error. It's going to say, this does not work. And that is like understanding why was it not working? Was my file path wrong? Was there a break in my file because there was a space and I need to make like either change my file name or make adjustments so it reads it without the space. Sometimes, so sometimes the data frame is like just empty, or it's showing up as like all nulls, like the data is just not there. It's mislabeled,
Mhm.
or it's just not, you're trying to join two data sets and they're just not joining correctly. So there's a huge part of like troubleshooting as you move from line of code to line of code to sort of say, what is wrong here? But why you're moving forward is usually there's some inquiry in your mind. You're trying to make a correlation. And you know, again, bringing a racial component back to the conversation, when I was in my urban planning, we used a data set called Cal EnviroScreen. And it was looking at different factors of pollution. And you talk about food deserts, like it had all this different data related to environment and communities and income and linguistic isolation. And so we wanted to see, like, what could we see about like we could marry this environmental data set to a demographic data set, and what could we learn? And then we could sort of say, how do these factors impact white people differently than brown or black people? And what, at first, and we tried all sorts of different things, like, was linguistic isolation an issue that correlated to poverty? Nope. Was this, exposure to pesticides and like other health outcomes? Like we were just trying to look for like what would give us something that was like worth like a story, because a lot of things you look at data and it's like meh, meh, like there's nothing really big there. There's just like, yeah, it's a loose correlation, but I can't really. And then every once in a while you look at data and you'll just see it so clearly, like, oh, those things are connected. And so what we noticed for ours was the relationship between pollution and white people was a negative. Like, they were not impacted by it. You put pollution and the brown and black population, and they were highly impacted by it. And you could
Mhm.
see this again. Just what does the data tell you? I wasn't there with any sort of political agenda, social agenda. I was just wanting to investigate, what does the data tell us?
Mhm. I love that. So just to make sure I have it clear in my mind, what you're saying is you're holding that question that you have, and then you're looking at the data and then all of the different factors to see if there's a correlation versus like that causation that you said earlier. Or do I have it backwards?
No, you've got you've got it on the right track, because like, so this urban heat island, what I'm trying to figure out is I've got to train a model and I've got to show a model, how do you identify a where we can predict you're going to have an urban heat island here. And one of the data sets that I chose that they did not provide to us was, I was like, I wonder how those equity maps or inequity maps play into this. Does that have a relationship? And in the data that we explore in this notebook, the conclusion is it has a huge indication. So now I can go back and say, yeah, if it was what they called A or B, or green and blue, where they call it sort of an advantage neighborhood, I can pretty much say that is less likely to have a heat index impact. Where if it was considered disadvantaged, or in their language dangerous, it was going to have a much higher heat index. So this is another thing we have to be really careful when we train models, is not to bring bias into training models, because we live in a very biased society. And we
Mm-hmm.
were saying, oh, the power of tech, but it's like, well, who programs tech?
Mm-hmm.
I do a podcast. I've interviewed 50 professionals in tech. And I will say my language has evolved in this current administration, because I used to say I interviewed 50 women in tech, but now I just call them professionals because they're the same thing. But when I would take that transcript into Adobe and have the AI translate it, if they didn't have a very straight American accent, any international accent was just like was had never been trained on it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why we need a diverse set of people with eyes on AI and machine learning, so that it's being trained with the reality of our very diverse and complex worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So
So
it's
what
not,
are, oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just saying, so it's not oversimplified or exclusionary.
So what are some tips that you can give to our listeners to help ensure that they are checking to mitigate for bias?
There are some interesting challenges. I know we did a couple in school where you test your own bias,
Okay.
and you go through these things, and based on your timing of your response, and it can be related to men and women, it can be related to black and white, it can be related to um, sort of the native, brown, black, white, Asian, like they give you a whole diverse set, and based on your response times, and it's like they'll put that with the relationship to a gun. What do you think? They'll put that relationship to these different items, and like you have to like go through it one way and then go through it another way, and yeah, based on your time of if it's easy for you and you make that connection, you go fast. If it's slow and you don't quite make that connection, you go slowly, and then they're able to come back to you with a report on like, this is your bias.
Got it. Thank you. And so after people have done that and they've gotten the data and they've seen a correlation, what are the next steps?
One of the things that I will say, like, sort of a surprising thing for me, because I come out of communication. I love communicating. I love teaching. I love mentoring. I love being engaged. But then I like to shut the door and be quiet and just like write my code. And so it's like I have these kind of two sides to my personality, but I have that social public side. And I notice that like a lot of people who are gravitate to tech gravitate to coding, or especially cybersecurity, because they're like, I'm chasing the bad guys and I don't want them to find me. So they don't show up in public ways. They don't show up socially, and I think that that also, especially for women, I do feel like it's really important to own your place on the stage and own your place in the community and be visible and be connected. And I think that was a huge advantage that I had coming into making this kind of hard left into owning my identity in tech, in science, in intelligence, because I'm not shy. And so I would raise my hand for things like being a Women Techmaker ambassador. And I have my little pin, and planning events and creating content and becoming a Microsoft Student Learn ambassador, and just all being an Esri YPN, which is Young Professional Network ambassador. And oh, NICE. You asked me to answer the question, what is NICE? NICE is part of NIST, which is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, which is one of the frameworks they provide for businesses and organizations to be cybersecurity aware and safe. I mean, you can never be 100% safe, but it's a framework to sort of protect yourself. And so NICE is the National Institute of Cybersecurity Education.
Awesome. Thank you. I think that is all the questions. I don't know if you want to go back into
The notebook, yeah.
notebook so that people can see. Hopefully, everyone is still following along. And if you are, we are excited for you to continue diving into the notebook.
Yeah, it's very much, like I said, it's going to work as well as, well, I think actually, entire screen. Okay. It's going to work as well as the data that you've loaded into it. So, like I said, with this one, because I have no data, I have no access to really run these. But when I come into the one that I've created and I've run, because my data is there, then I'm able to sort of run each of those. And so, yeah, let's talk a little about like when I'm thinking of this. I find that a lot of it and you get, as you practice, that there becomes sort of this very obvious thing when you're looking at data. So here, this is a clear and cloudless day that we have for this study area, but this is actually what they call a base map. So when you're in ArcGIS Pro, you have the options to have all sorts of different types of backgrounds. So I could have this be just um, black and gray. I can have it be more of sort of like just kind of an illustration. I mean, there's just all sorts of different types of what they call just the base map, which are the cleanest view of the area. And again, they could be in that kind of Landsat satellite kind of imagery, or they could be in more sort of drawn with sort of point line polygon type of background. So you select your background, and then I put a bounding box around it so that we could sort of see what the actual sort of study area is. This image came from another tool that I use called Cesium. Cesium you can integrate with JavaScript, and then you can create all sorts of scenes and movements and angles, and it's a full 3D software, and they've recently integrated with both Google and Esri to have these photorealistic 3D tiles, which you can also find on Google Maps. So I don't know if you've had the chance to do one of the fly-throughs, but I believe New York City, I know San Diego, I think some of the major cities in the United States, you can actually get a whole sort of 3D fly through, and it goes kind of automatically. And then you can go back and you can customize the view and go where you want it to go with whatever sort of angle you want. So yeah, if you look at Google Maps and you look at the fly through, that's what that technology is. It's using these 3D photorealistic tiles. And so what I have here is just a straight view down. But if I were to toggle it, because there's a little controller on the left or right, I can get an angle. I can zoom in, I can zoom out. Like you have a lot of control over what you can do with that technology. And again, the USGS is where we get these files from for the satellite imagery, and it goes back to about 1984. So you can get a lot of historical data, and you give it your coordinates or you make your little bounding box of what area you're looking to get data from, and you set your date that you're looking for that data, what your date range is, and then it will show up and show you the actual tiles, which include your bounding box, and you can select the data that you want to work with. And then just coming down through here, again, indices are very powerful, but depend on what you're working with and what you're looking to determine. So if it's a drought situation and you want to see, hey, did this drought have an impact on agriculture over this period of time? That NDVI, which is the naturalized differential vegetation index, is going to be really powerful. If you've had a burn situation, a fire, that NBR is a normalized burn ratio. And NBR2 looks a little bit more for what kind of liquid humidity kind of is in the soil, but it also is really, really good for looking at a fire burn situation. So each of these indices kind of has a different power and a different value, purpose of why it's used. And so let's go into this. So my first piece of code here, like why did I choose this code? Why did I feel like I needed to ask ChatGPT to write this for me? Is I decided that so after I visualized these indices, which are what I had in my data set over here, I'd uploaded them. Now I wanted to sort of say, you know what, those are kind of really large. Those are really large files or images, and it doesn't nearly get us to our study area. So the next thing I asked was, hey, can you clip it for me? Can you give me something that's going to be much more focused in on our study area? So that's why the row start, row end, column start, column end, sort of, and my, again, purpose of this is clip the data and then return clipped data is my instruction to it. So what you're going to get next is that's exactly what it has here. So it had those same indices, but now they've clipped it to my specifications. You can see that Manhattan Island right in the middle there. And so then my next question was, did I have all of the indices as I wanted them to? Or no, sorry, let me explain. I just clipped the one to see if it was correct. Then I was happy with what I clipped, and I was like, great, let's do it for them all. So then there's a little sub scroll bar in here. So now all those indices are clipped to my And then I was like, okay, now like we've looked at indices, let's look at natural color. So here, similarly, I'm looking at the each of these comes with bands. So I was like, okay, there's band 1, band 2, band 3, band 4, 5, 6, 7, and 10. So I was like, let us bring in our bands. Okay. So I guess where I'm going with this is there's sort of a logic to it as you're going through it. You just kind of, and then I was like, okay, let's clip those bands.
There's a policeman at the door. Could you help us?
Hold on. Apparently there's someone's at the door that I'm being asked. Give me 1 second.
Police guy.
Okay.
He's investigating ID.
All right, everyone. We just really quickly waiting on Philippa to come back. Let me see.
Here. Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Philippa.
Okay.
Just wanted to make sure everything was okay.
No, apparently someone's here asking about one of our neighbors. I'm like, I'll be there. Well, actually, we're going to wrap up in like 6 minutes. I will go help them. But you have my undivided attention for the next 6 minutes. So, yeah, so okay. But I want to actually, Renee, can you come back a moment? Because we're going through that, but I want to again, like check in on in questions, because did my logic of how I'm working through something make sense? Because you were saying, how do you know what's next? What's next? What's next?
Yes, it did. So just to, like make sure that our listeners also understand the process. And if you are joining us from LinkedIn, hello, everyone. Apologies. It won't allow us to like send you messages in LinkedIn, but we know you're there. Thank you. If you want to join us over in YouTube, you can send out your questions here in YouTube. And we also have the link to the files. Just want that everyone knows that. But yeah, so Philippa, when you were going through the process, you have the question, you start searching, you access it from data from trusted sources like Esri. Then you start loading the data into a notebook. From there, you kind of test the code, and then you see if there are any correlations. And then when you were doing the heat map and the images, you kind of test one before you run it on everything to make sure it's going. There are no errors, essentially. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's getting the extent that I want it to. So I would make those adjustments until I get it to where I want it to be. And similarly, I was going to say, stay with me, but if it's okay that I just share my screen while you stay with me. I see makes sense using ChatGPT. It's like a good base and tuning the code from there. Absolutely. I think one of the things about ChatGPT is it's made me not afraid, because I don't think I would have done any of it. I know there was Stack Overflow, and that was like people's lifeline to like, how do I do this? But again, similarly, people would go to a community, and you still need that community element. So and you're going to learn this incrementally. Do not be afraid of any of this. And I just want to like give you a little bit of timeline. I started my graduate school education in May of 2021 in urban planning. We had our first data science course, and I was like, "Ooh, I want more of that." Like, I just fell in love with that. I asked someone, "Hey, can I learn this on my own?" And they said, "Yeah, you can, but if you are still in academics, like it's probably good to go with a program." And I got what's called a GIST, which is Geographic Information Science and Technology. And then I was like, wow, I would like to do this professionally, and I am at a starting point. I'm going to stay in a little longer. And then from there, I wanted the real world experience, and I wanted these internships with government. And that's where I wandered to the law school. And I was like, I'm also, if I'm doing data, I should know how to secure that data. So that's how that law school piece kind of all came in. And what I wanted to share is I'm sharing my screen. Oh, you can see my screen. Okay, so can you see my screen here?
Yes.
Okay, so New York City Open Data, all cities, most cities, all big cities have these portals. And so when I wanted New York City data, and I wanted like tree data, and I wanted just any kind of data you can think of, you can find it here. So if you're looking, having a spatial element can be as simple as saying it's New York, and then it's Brooklyn, it's Bronx, it's Staten Island, and you can map that. So it doesn't even need to have coordinates. It can have or longitude, latitude. It can literally just have the name of the place. If you have multiple countries, if you have multiple states, if you have multiple cities, you can map that. I mean, there's ways you can add coordinates and to it, but that as long as there's a place attached to the data, you have what you need.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you. And then we have another question, which is regarding what do you prefer more of, code or managing the projects?
Everything's going to depend on what the role is and what the team is and what the project is and what the budget is and all of these things. To me, it's really important to be technologically proficient and I want to be a GIS developer. Like that is my goal, that I can do that job. But at the same time, I've found myself stepping back into entrepreneurship, which I've done before and I will do again. And then you are a project leader because you have to work and you realize like some of the things you want to get done, you can't do by yourself. There needs to be a team. So whether you're led or you're leading, I think having the skills to be interchangeable in those, which comes back to why I feel like that power of leadership, of communication, all of those things that I had used and learned in my first iteration of my career were not lost. I mean, I honestly, there was a point like in my mid tech learning all this tech stuff that I was just thinking that I would completely put away everything I'd learned and done previously because I was like, oh, I'm just on this new path. And then there was this other point where it's like, wait, it all ties together. It all comes together in and nothing is lost. And so everything you learn, everything you do here, don't just remember it all like it's all incremental and everything will build on everything else. And if you don't understand something this first time, but you can just kind of go past it, just pin it. It'll come back. You'll understand it better from a different perspective. I've done martial arts for years, and they have that thing like they're like your second degree black belt test is, sorry, your yellow belt, blue belt. Sorry, I'm a second degree now, a black belt now, but they were saying don't worry about it because you're going to do this test over and over and over again. When you do your blue belt test as a second degree black belt, we expect it to be much better. But when you're doing it for your first time as a blue belt, just get through it.
I love that. Thank you.
What are blog sites and books you recommend to understand the workflow and perspective for GIS versus numeric, quantitative, regular data analysis? There are so many good books out there. I almost feel like you just need to begin. Uh, I would say, like, I've started and we're committed to building, we're sort of at the beginning of it, this MAPS data design Substack. And I've written tons and tons of articles this year, like dozens of articles. And I have two tracks. One's called Foundations for Beginners and one's called Mastery for Professionals. And it's really forcing me in a good force to go back over concepts that I think I know, but now I get to research and go deeper into. So I would like to take that question with me and kind of deliver you that as a blog for so what are some of those resources to kind of keep going.
Oh, okay, great. And so if you are here still, we do have your blog, which is on Substack. I need to start, but I will start and bring it back up to the chat for that in case you all want to sign up. Another question that we have, because I know we're at 7:30, so we're a little over, but this was the last question that we had, which was from Nathan.
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, thank you for your time, sharing your expertise. Two questions. Is it possible to reach out to you and get some detailed Gen AI, geospatial, GIS questions? That's kind of like my point of setting up both YouTube and Substack and being here is to be a resource for people because I feel like it's almost like I feel like I have enough of what I've learned and I'll continue learning. But I think like my next iteration of what I want to do is make sure I know everything that I know as well as I can know it. And the only way to do that is by sharing it, teaching it, mentoring others.
I love that. Thank you so much, Philippa. We are out of time. I feel like we could have talked to you for hours on end. So much great content. That was a lot all at once. How can everyone reach out to you? I'm going to add in your blog for everyone to
Yeah.
find.
You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I'll just pop my LinkedIn into the chat and then we can sort of.
Yeah. And as we're thinking of closing out, I think you touched on a point about how you made sure nothing was lost from your experience. A lot of people who may be pivoting or switching, can you give them ideas of how you combine all of your different experiences to realize that your geospatial data is your next step in where you're going?
Well, I want to sort of say, like, one of the taglines that I had when I sort of decided, okay, I'm going to set up our own shop and do, because actually when you say where am I, I'm in San Diego, but I'm here half the time and I'm in New York the other half the time. And I was like, no, I'm not going to argue with employers about the fact that I live on two coasts. Like, that's just non-negotiable for me, right? And so that's why I was like, you know what, I'm gonna, and in that process, anyway, sorry, there was a question there that I was answering. You were saying, how do we, oh, how
Combine.
does it all come together? Yeah, I think one of the things is when I went through, I go to USC and I, as an online student, and I did my undergrad there as a residential student years ago. And I looked at every major. I don't know why. I just was like curious, like what classes they offered. And I noticed that there was every single major at USC. It doesn't matter if you're communications, criminal justice, urban planning, biology, like any major you have, you are going to have a data science class.
Mm,
And what I realized is that people over a certain age aren't going to have that. People under a certain age are definitely going to have that. So these are not skills to say, I'm going to be a data scientist. These are skills that you're going to do whatever you're going to do, but you can bring data science into it and say, oh, there's a data set I want to look at. I want to see how this could inform my job and make me make a better decision, or help my boss or manager make a better decision, or inform my team about this. So data science is really a skill that's used by all of us. So you're not here to be a data scientist. You may choose to sort of go along the path, but even if you are a data scientist, you're going to have expertise in particular industries that you know more about than other people. So the same thing is AI, machine learning. It's here. It's not going away. And we all need to educate ourselves. Oh, well, that's what I was saying about the company. Like, my tagline for it is about building future-proofed leaders
mm.
in technology, security, and resilient governance. Those are the things I'm interested in. But AI is here. It's like, and it's like, you're not going to be replaced by AI, at least not yet, but you will be replaced by the person who's using it.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Philippa, for sharing your expertise with us today and taking time. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us. We hope you found this workshop extremely valuable. I know I did. And I definitely would love to learn more from you, Philippa. So you will see my subscriptions on your blog to chat more. We have another exciting workshop for you all coming up next week, same time, same place. Please be sure to subscribe and like our video and give it a thumbs up if you haven't already. Have a great night. Thank you again, Philippa, and everyone enjoy.